So why do you think what was the calculus behind the Chinese Communist Party's decision to make this attack in the Second Thomas Shoal? Do you think they were kind of they were seeing this renewed alliance between the Philippines and the U.S. and they wanted to test the boundaries, see what the reaction would be?
I think that's part of it. We don't have any. We do have statements from the Chinese press that we all look at that where they talk about, hey, this is ours, and nobody should be thinking any other way. This is our sovereign territory, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't like it when small countries defy them. So I think there is a part of the Communist Party's agenda is to make sure that they remind people. And you just saw this week also an announcement from the Philippines and the Vietnamese to establish joint kind of cooperation in the South China Sea. So this is another area where Beijing wouldn't want to see that, wouldn't want to hear about it, wouldn't want to allow that to grow any further. Because traditionally, the Filipinos and the Vietnamese may have had kind of disputes over different parts of the South China Sea, but now they're talking to each other about how can we cooperate and how can we confront what China's doing. So I think, in general, Beijing sees their power slipping, if you will, relative power slipping potentially in the South China Sea, at least in the diplomatic arena, if not in other arenas.
How do you think they will try to gain back that power?
Well, I think ultimately they're going to use military force as the guarantor of all the other elements of national power. And so by having those three major naval air stations down in the Spratlys at Mischief, Fiery Cross, and Subi, having patrols by warships and submarines across the South China Sea, having bombers and fighters patrolling over, having their Coast Guard go down and harass and push around Chinese or Filipino fishing boats, in addition Vietnamese fishing boats and Taiwan fishing boats and others. The Chinese are asserting themselves that way, and they kind of disregard. They called the 2016 Permanent Court of Ruling a farce, so they don't even acknowledge its existence. So I think in the diplomatic arena, I think they'll use military kinds of tactics in this bullying to try to say to Duterte or to Marcos, hey, we're going to keep this up until you come back and change your behavior. And then once you do that, then we can talk about how you can get money.
Well, you're speaking about the military being the ultimate guarantor of national power. I know you've said that the PLA Navy has a 10-to-1 advantage to the U.S. Navy. Why do you say that?
Just from the amount of ships that are down in the region and the folks that I've talked to in terms of our presence down there. I mean, the United States Navy, the 7th Fleet, doesn't have a patrol station 24/7 in the South China Sea. We transit through, and we sometimes periodically do exercises. But on a day-to-day basis, the Chinese have about, what I've heard, is about 10 warships that are operating, and that was several years ago. That's like 5 years ago. But around 10 ships operating in the South China Sea. And given the fact that they've got, as I mentioned, I'll say that for the third time, Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef. These are major naval bases and runways, 10,000-foot runways. But in terms of naval capacity, there are ships from the South China Sea or from the South Sea Fleet up on the mainland, Zhongshan, and from Hainan Island that can come down there, that are down there. But we don't have this kind of everyday imagery coming from commercial imagery that shows us there's 5 ships at Subi, there's 4 ships, there's 3 ships. We don't have that on a daily basis. But in general, they're down there all the time, and they're operating, and they're patrolling, and they're harassing, and they're covering down on what they think is theirs, and then they're pushing away at other places.
When you say the 10-to-1 advantage, is that specifically in the South China Sea?
I think at this point, yeah. It's been a while since I've looked at the East China Sea, and the Chinese, though, have a presence in the East China Sea now it's quite large compared to what it was when I was, getting ready to retire, where they, had a couple of ships at one time that never crossed the median line. By the time I was retiring, Chinese warships were operating east of the median line on patrol station, as opposed to, leaving Shanghai, some port in the East Sea Fleet, coming out and then turning around and going back. They would stay on station for a week, or not a week, but 3 or 4 days or something. And they were slowly closing around the Senkaku. And then we just saw a report today that, you had that big report of the 11 ships from the PRC Navy and the Russian Navy that had done an exercise in the Sea of Japan, then went up into the Alaskan Gulf of Alaska and operated near America's territory, our territory. And then we didn't hear much about it. Well, what they did is they came down the east coast of Japan, and here in the last 24 or 48 hours, they transited westward, coming from the Philippine Sea back through the Miyako Strait, which is near Okinawa, back into the East China Sea. 11 ships. And it's the first time that the Russians and the Chinese have operated together through that strait, not together anywhere else, but to come together is an 11 ship, I don't want to say armada, but as an 11 ship group. They weren't just, hey, I'm Russians and I'm Chinese and I came through 4 hours before you. No, they were together as a combined naval force.
So this expansion of China's military power in the region, is that because the U.S. hasn't drawn any red lines? Can the U.S. draw any red lines, especially if there's a 10-1 advantage, as you say?
Well, it's hard to draw lines in the sea. I mean, we just don't have those. So, I mean, as long as the Chinese have built their naval force, they can go wherever they want. What we haven't done is to proportionally maintain our relative balance of power. So if you go back before this great military buildup that started around 1999, 2000, so for the last 25 years, basically, if you go back before that, the U.S. was the dominant military power in the region. And we were there and we transited places and we did things and we made sure that people could feel free about commercial ships going anywhere they want. And there wasn't going to be piracy or robbery or another Navy was going to sink them. And then that slowly changed over 25 years. And the United States Navy, instead of saying, okay, we're going to maintain that relative balance and edge, relative balance of power that has that edge, we've essentially gone down while they've gone up. And it's lessened our ability to deter them from bullying activities like we're seeing at Second Thomas Shoal.
When we bring this kind of things up on China Uncensored, like when we talk about the Chinese like building up their navy, the PLA Navy building up, or the fact that the PLA Navy has surpassed the number of ships that the U.S. Navy has, we'll often get reactions from people saying, well, but you have to look at the kind of ships. The U.S. has a much more advanced Navy. We have larger ships, et cetera, et cetera. So there seems to be like a dismissal of these concerns. How do you see that?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a book with co-author Dr. Brad Thayer, and he's identified a concept called threat deflation. And I knew what it was conceptually because I'd experienced it in my career in the Navy. But he actually coined that term, and I think it's a great term because it really gets to this one of the problems about why we're at where we're at today, which is that we've deflated the threat for 25 years about the PRC, both from, whole of government comprehensive national power perspective, but specifically in the military arena. We've tended to downplay the threat of the military and said things like you just quoted that people routinely say to you and they say to me, oh, come on, they don't have as good as ships as us. They don't have this. They don't have that. They're inferior. They haven't been to war since 1979. There's just a litany of rationale to say that we don't have to worry and we can delay this and kick the can down the road. But from my experience and my knowledge and my understanding, the PLA Navy is not an inferior Navy. They're a bigger Navy in terms of total number of warships. In terms of total tonnage, the United States is still bigger because we have 11 aircraft carriers. But in the last 5 to 7 years, produced tonnage, the Chinese have outproduced the United States for the last 7 years in terms of total tonnage. For instance, amphibious warships, they've produced 3 of these Type 075 amphibious assault helicopter carriers. So they grew 3 amphibious assault helicopters in the space of, about a couple of years, about 3 years. And the United States in that same period, or even going back a little bit further, like 5 years, we produced 1. We had 1 burn up, the Bonhomme Richard in San Diego. So in terms of numbers and tonnage, they're outproducing us. They bought and produced. They had 1 they bought, the carrier Liao Ning, but they built 2 other aircraft carriers while in the space of 10 years, while the United States built one, the Ford. So we could go down the list of things where the trend line is that they're going more powerful, and their weapon systems are weapon systems that are right now, at least when it comes to the mission of war at sea, fighting and sinking another fleet, they have superior weapons. They have like the YJ-18 that has like a 300 kilometer distance, 300 kilometer distance. So we don't have anything like that. And they're fielding now. They're talking about their fielding or getting ready to field hypersonic weapons. So are we. We're in a race there. But the point is that they're not an inferior Navy. And by just the simple fact, we just saw them, do a major exercise with the Russians in the Sea of Japan, then combined force go up to the Gulf of Alaska, then head down through the Western Pacific, and then back in through the Miyako Strait with the Russians. These are not the actions of an inferior Navy. And I know there's one popular YouTube person out there or pundit. His name's Peter Zahan, and he likes to talk about that the Chinese Navy can't even sail more than X miles. He's put some limitation on it. I don't know where he gets his information, but the Chinese are actually building a large number of refuelers and reoilers that allow them to do underway replenishment. And so they've been doing and practicing underway replenishment, sending ships to the Gulf of Aden for 15 years. So those are thousands of miles away. Now it's just 3 ships, but they have a dozen of these combined type 091 and 901 and 903, comprehensive resupply ships. One's 25,000 tons, and then one's almost 40,000 tons. So they have, which are the same size as American Navy resupply ships. So they know what needs to be done to make a Navy that can be projected around the globe.